Welcome everyone, my name is Jordan Farmer. This is the Uncommon Ground YouTube channel where we are indoctrinating the masses, and today I'm going to be talking about the relationship between trade policy, foreign policy, how trade policy is foreign policy, and how we can navigate that whole space to make sure that we're achieving the best ends possible. So first off, trade is just the exchange of goods or services over borders. So on one hand, you have money and consumption going to another country, and then in that country you have the production happening. So you have the labor and the job value. So laborers are being fed more money in that system, and then you also have a certain amount of profit on top of that. And then you have it shipped over, and then you have some company, or it might be the same company in the other country, that is then selling that product in that consumer market. So it's one country's consumer market feeding another country's production market. And only when countries have trade opened up between them can this process take place. So it's something that is inherently involved in government policy. There's no way of getting around government involvement in trade. The most sort of boneheaded, simple way to understand this is that no individual country, of course I messed it up, no individual person or company can ever negotiate on equal terms or in a superior term with a major country with a major market on the planet. What do I mean by this? Disney isn't going to go and lobby the Chinese government to change their policy, because China is bigger than Disney. China is bigger than any of those individual corporations. You know, Trump isn't going to go to Russia and be able to dictate terms that he just likes according to his own preferences. Now, there's a mutual sort of relationship there where when you bring people business into your country, you know, it benefits you, but at the end of the day, you're not in the strength position in that negotiation. And at the end of the day, trading law can never ever be dictated by individual businesses or by individual actors. It has to be government policy. So there's no escaping government policy. There's no free market, boneheaded free trade. There's no boneheaded free market economies equal free trade thought. Unfortunately, many conservatives and much of the standard conservative thinking around trade is literally free markets equal free trade, because they both say free in front of them, and that's my view on free trade. We should have free trade. We should have no tariffs. What does that actually mean? What does that actually mean? Here's what that actually means. That means that our government does absolutely nothing to advocate for the rights of laborers or consumers in our country, but the other country does negotiate on behalf of their workers and companies and laborers and all that stuff the terms of the trade. So basically what that means is free trade means one-sided trade where we are getting screwed. Now, when you open up trade between two countries, and one country's a lot poorer than the other, like if you assume everything else is the same, but one country has a lot less jobs, a lot less economic activity, a lot less money, and they their labor inputs are significantly lower than in the other country. Assume the skill sets of the workers are the same, and they're not always, but assume that the skill sets of the workers are the same and everything else is the same. Just because they're getting paid lower wages, and just because the labor inputs on that side of the equation are lower, investors will be attracted to that market. Producers might even be so incentivized to maximize their return on investment that they will outsource, offshore, export, or just take away production out of our labor market, decreasing the demand, decreasing jobs, decreasing the demand for labor, decreasing the return on that productivity for labor. Because if you go from paying someone 100 grand to 10 grand a year, the business can just pocket that 90 grand, because the price market, the prices, especially in the rich consumer market, like in the United States, the prices haven't gone anywhere. What people need to understand about pricing and production and how all this works is you have the price. Let's say it's $100 for this ticket for something. we'll call it, let's say it's a printed golden ticket for going to a concert or whatever. We'll say $8 of the 100 go to expenses in actually producing the particular good. And then you have another $8 that's labor. And then you sell it for 100. That gives you, 100 minus 16, which is 84. That gives you $84 in profit. If you can then go to another country where you only have to pay $4 in labor inputs, then you can bring the price down to 12. The price in the initial consumer market is still going to be $100. In the other consumer market, it'll be something else, and you're now feeding that other consumer market with the disproportionate, well, actually with trade, but specifically with disproportionate trade. And so you're getting a higher profit margin within the market over there and a higher profit margin in this market over here. Lower labor inputs on both sides. The prices are the same, and the people get screwed on both sides. That's anywho. So we have two options. Once we acknowledge all that truth, we have two options. There is no option of the government isn't involved. I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. There's just, if you don't get that by now, rewatch this video. So we have two different options. We have protect our economy from outward influence. So if you trade with another country, particularly if you have free trade, but if you trade with another country at all, you are subjecting your people, your economy, your consumers, your producers, your investors to the government policies of that other country. You're intertwining them. So there's a tremendous amount of danger, and you're subjecting your people to that. So there's one argument to be made that we should have maximum tariffs, which are a tax on imports, so that our consumer market doesn't feed any other production markets. It only feeds our own jobs and grows our own economy. And to the extent that we can export and sell the amazing goods that we make here, we'll sell those to other countries and they can make us richer for it. But we are giving nothing up from us, or we are giving nothing up ourselves in trading. That is the current policy of China. On top of the fact that they have that policy, they also use, because they have a totalitarian control of the economy, they use all of the little mechanisms like inflation and legally requiring any company that goes to China has to partner with a native Chinese, and that native Chinese has to own 51% of the company, which means that pretty much at any point they could take the intellectual property and steal it and go open up a new company, sell it to that other company that they own, and then they just make it. So they can just steal our creativity and the innovation that is the main fruit of economic freedom. They also have a 0% corporate income tax rate, which I advocate for, and we don't have over here. Ours is higher, which means that investors want to go there, etc., etc., etc. Every single tool that they can use to manipulate the trading relationship, they do, and that's intelligent. Not across the board. The one thing that they do that is inhumane is that they dilute all of their wages. They maintain artificially slave wages to make it so that they're the cheapest place to produce anywhere on the planet. And they subsidize concrete, they subsidize energy, and they import energy, but they subsidize a bunch of things to make those artificially cheap, which then manipulates the cost of production in their country relative to others. They're playing all the games. So we can choose to adopt the China model, where we say screw you to the world, and we just make trading relationships that benefit us most and them least, or we can follow what I consider to be the moderate approach. Now, in order to understand why I consider this the moderate approach, you have to understand two things. One, well, the main thing you have to understand is that no country can fight a modern war without modern industry, because of the military-industrial complex, and because military equipment and personnel and all that stuff has been industrialized. You need an industrial base in order to actually pay for equipment that's that expensive. So when we trade with other countries and we make them richer, we're empowering their government and we're empowering their tax base, and we're fueling any bad activity that they are involved in. Particularly if we just open up our country to trade and we don't have any rules governing what's going on. So in order to so you need to have that going in. You need to understand that a good economy means greater military threat. You also need to understand that when we trade with another country, that makes our economies codependent to a certain degree. I'll use Mexico as the example. In Mexico, their GDP is about $1.3 trillion. Ours is about 21, so ours is huge compared to theirs. The total value of all the exports from Mexico to the United States, so the jobs over there that are dependent on the consumer over here, is about $400 billion as of a couple years ago. So that $400 billion is just under a third of their economy. It's about 30% of their economy. Which means that if that was cut off and all of those exports were cut off from Mexico, the United States, if we increase tariffs to 100% or 1,000,000,000% or whatever and shut down all trade, that's a third of the Mexican economy gone overnight. I mean, the president has the ability to implement these kinds of tariffs. So overnight, it's done. But going the other direction, so we have a trade deficit with them. Only about $300 billion of production over here is fueled by consumption over there. And that 300 billion represents about 2%. I'm going off the top of my head here, but represents about 2% of 1.5% of our economy. So if they tariffed and did everything to us, we wouldn't feel it at all. Some counties on the border and some people in Texas would feel it. And that's about it, man. I mean, the economy here overall would be fine. Tons of I mean, you'd have a job replacement, and you'd have a lot of things happening on, or a lot of things going on, but at the end of the day, we'd be fine. So when you have a trading relationship with that, like that, you can command, as a rich country like us, you can command the behavior of a poorer country through tariffs alone. So, if you believe in America, you believe in our highest ideals, you believe in human rights and human freedom and trying to create a society globally that is anti-totalitarian, pro-freedom, and peaceful, you can use trade and tariffs and this whole dynamic relationship to push foreign policy and to advocate for foreign policy. Now, you might not believe me. I'm going to give you an example of how this worked tremendously. A couple easy examples. Iran has been a much more weak threat in terms of foreign policy since we implemented sanctions, and they weren't much of a threat to begin with. People that talk about Iran like it's this big dangerous thing. Their best GDP year was about $400-500 billion, and this year we're spending $740 billion on the United States military. So, so our military budget is bigger than their entire country's economy. So if we were to get into any engagement with them, it would last weeks, literally. So please, anyone who's like, oh, Iran is so dangerous, they're not. And they're only weaker since the sanctions have been in place. So there you go. But that wasn't the example I was going to use. Mexico. Again, 30% of their economy is dependent on exports to the United States. So when Trump was dealing with the caravans and was dealing with all kinds of issues at the border and felt like the Mexico side was really, really failing to enforce their own security laws. People don't know this. Mexico has a wall on their southern border. So they're all about labor, or they're all about border security, hypothetically, just not not for their northern border going the other way. And Trump was not going to have that. So he threatened tariffs and closing off trade between Mexico and the United States if they did not act and do something to help with immigration. So immigration and trade, hypothetically, totally unrelated, but used together. We had 26,000 Mexican troops of various kinds brought to their northern border, our southern border, to protect the border, and numbers of crossings and stuff definitely decreased as a result. So, by flexing this power, we can actually make change happen. When it comes to China and taming the big dragon of China, the only way we're going to tame it is if the United States and all of the European countries and all of the African countries and all of the other Asian countries, or at least, you know, a giant majority of all of those economies, sanction, boycott, tariff, and remove themselves from China. And say, unless you stop having concentration camps for Muslims in your country, re-education camps, and unless you stop screwing with people all across the globe and manipulating people, unless you recognize Taiwan as a legitimate country, unless you start behaving China, we're not going to do business with you. We're not obligated to do business with you. And if we implemented tariffs and sanctions and boycotts and we made them feel the economic pain, not only would we undermine the Chinese system because they're only propped up because of all of our one-sided policies in part, but we would also, sorry, I didn't know where I was going with that. But anyways, we would get them to change their behavior, is the point. We'd get them to start being normal actors on the world stage and behave well and treat their people with basic human decency internally. And that's entirely possible. That's absolutely done. And you just need to have an apparatus of human rights standards with tariffs that is sort of automated. And then as people are designated as certain types of offenders in their actions on the world stage, we will then tariff and tax and sanction them in order to make them poor, so that either A, they're a weaker threat globally, or B, and B, so that they're both a weaker threat, and to incentivize them in order to act more, to act better. Either they're going to be poor and not a threat, or they're going to be wealthier and a better ally. One or the other. Those are the only options we should tolerate. Donald Trump is one of the few people that has actually understood this, understood the weight and the magnitude of the American economy and how to leverage it in foreign policy, and he's the only reason why I even know that this is how you can actually do it, because I've seen it done, I've seen it work. We now have many acknowledgments and peace deals and trade relationships that are opening up between Muslim countries and Israel, which is the beginning stages of normalized relations between Palestine and Israel. Russia's weaker, China's weaker, NATO's stronger, Iran is weaker, North Korea's weaker, and those were all sanctioned. It's the way to go. And so when it comes to the use of war and my view on the military, it's very, very straightforward. We want to have a strong military. You always want to be able to fight, but you only want to pick the fights that you have to fight. And everywhere else that we can just use economic forces to manipulate behavior overseas and in order to push the world into a better, more humanitarian place, that's the way we do it. That's how we get it done. And the better off we'll be. And we won't have to lose any blood or any lives on either side, which I think is tremendous and is just, it's wonderful. So, that is all, folks. I hope you like this. Please like and subscribe and share. Let's blow this channel up. Peace. I'll see you tomorrow.